Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, The Learner is Always Right, Improving the Customer Experience with Microlearning, presented by Litmos and Talented Learning. Thank you all so much for being here today. Well, while we're waiting, you can feel free to use the chat window to your right and tell us where you're logging in from. And we're just going to wait for more folks to trickle in. But while we do, I'll go over our agenda. I'll introduce our speakers, and I'll share a few housekeeping notes to help you all get the most out of today's webinar. All right, so joining us today are two leading voices in the learning and development space. Litmos's Chief Learning Officer, Dr. Jill Stefaniak, and the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Talented Learning, John Lay. As you can see, we'll be covering a lot of ground today, including an overview of microlearning, how it can improve customer experience, microlearning best practices, and some tips for integrating microlearning into your CX roadmap. But before we get this awesome conversation going, I wanted to share a couple of housekeeping notes. So as you'll notice in your webinar console, you do have a chat box to your right of the slide deck area. And throughout the presentation, you can use that chat box to answer the questions that we're going to ask you during the presentation and discuss the topics at hand. But if you scroll down below that Q&A box, you will see, or below that chat box, you will see a Q&A box where you can type questions to our team at any time during the presentation. And we encourage you to use the Q&A window for questions and avoid sending questions in the chat, just because the chat moves really quickly and our team might not see your question if you put it into the chat window. And we'll actually be saving a couple of the questions that people ask in the Q&A box for our Q&A portion at toward the end of this session. So also a quick reminder that this session will be recorded, so you'll receive a link to that recording via the email that you registered with. All right, I've gotten the boring stuff out of the way, onto the exciting topics at hand. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Dr. Jill Stefaniak. Jill, take it away.
Thanks, Liz. And so when we've looked at some of our most recent stats in learning and development, particularly with workplace learning, we've found that learners who've received paced reinforcement lessons, if we look at these micro-learning experiences, tend to recall information 150% better after 6 months in comparison to those that have kind of had a knowledge dump put on them. And so one of the things that we'd like to talk with everybody about today is looking at ways in which we can leverage micro-learning to support our customer experiences. And so we're going to kind of talk about some of the pros and cons, when micro-learning might be most beneficial, as well as talk with John to get some tips as well on best practices to really be able to make those important decisions on to what extent and when you're going to integrate micro-learning into your CX roadmap. And so some of the things that we'd like to think about too is when we think about just retention of learning, right? Because anytime we're teaching our employees or our learners, our customers how to do something, we're hoping that they'll be able to retain it and apply it in a meaningful setting. And so compared to traditional training methods, micro-learning leads to 20% better retention, 22% faster completion, and 28% better performance. And so we have a polling question because we're really curious to see where everybody else is today. But if you could share in the chat, how do you use micro-learning in your daily life? It might be at work. It might be as a learner yourself. It might be for work in your personal lives. But feel free to put in the chat how you might be using it.
And I'll throw in some ideas that you see on a regular basis. You see micro-learning show up on social media. So you want to learn how to change a tire or a spark plug, you can go Reels or TikTok, or learn how to or a short on YouTube. It shows up in LinkedIn learning courses where they have their short 2-3 minute courses. It shows up in language learning for sure. So if anybody has taken or used Duolingo or Babbel or Memrise, are all examples of using micro-learning to teach you a language and to use that spaced repetition to try to get over the problem that it takes 10 to 20 times to see each new word until you You finally process it. You maybe even see it in some of your fitness apps, using things like Noom, watching your weight and learning at the same time, taking their micro learning courses with streaks and gamified elements in it. So those are some examples that I run into, Dr. Jill.
Yeah, and I'm seeing in the chat too, we've got a lot, YouTube's getting mentioned a lot too, right? Looking at a lot of those how-to videos when we're working on various DIY projects around the house, fixing our cars,
Sure.
you know, sometimes doing those tasks that we don't do routinely. That's when we're seeing a lot of that coming up, I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm. And the obvious one that I forgot is we all use it. Like if you're using like Google Workspace or Microsoft Office or really any major software application, there's those little short tutorials in there, little short videos that are helping you that are all context sensitive on what you're at. So that's a great way to improve the customer experience right there, is directly within the software applications while you're using it. But everybody uses YouTube, including myself.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that we want to be thinking about is, one of the questions that sometimes comes up is, can microlearning be standalone? Or is it more of a reinforcement or a complementary training method to support what we would consider to be traditional training methods that are used in the workplace? And so one of the things that's most important is recognizing why is it being used? Why is it that you might be selecting microlearning as a particular training method within your organization? So when we look at just the kind of overall benefits to microlearning, we know it's an effective training method to deliver information in short, focused segments. And so the microlearning is not the training method you're going to use if you're planning on delivering 10 learning objectives all at once, or you're planning on doing a major overhaul with organizational culture within your organization, or you're doing a new software adoption within your organization. Microlearning is not necessarily the right place for that. But where it is beneficial is when it can come in and support your existing training. So things like sending out reminders to your employees, reminders to your customers, that just in time, those key elements, just to kind of reinforce what they may have already been introduced to or what they've participated in. Usually when we're thinking about microlearnings from a learning design standpoint, we're looking at things that are generally brief, but we want to make sure that they're accessible. So thinking about, where are our learners going to be when they might benefit the most from that microlearning? And when we're talking about our customer experience, where are our customers going to be when they're sitting at their desks, perhaps saying, I need help with this next step? So again, really thinking about what's the environment look like where our learners or our customers may be wanting to access microlearnings. And one of the other benefits to microlearnings is that it really emphasizes learner autonomy through just-in-time learning. Oftentimes, like most just-in-time learning, sometimes we don't know when we're going to need it until we find ourselves in that situation saying, I'm having a block, I need help. I need to get to this next phase. And so this is where it's really important that we're thinking about ways we can leverage microlearning to be able to empower our learning audiences, whether it be our employees, whether it be customers trying to learn new products that we may be offering. It's just really important to be emphasizing that learner autonomy and thinking about the ways in which they're going to be navigating and interacting with that content.
And I like to pile on the just in time part, just to illustrate the difference. The difference before, like if you're learning a new software, is getting certified up front, before you actually start using the software, versus maybe taking very little training up front and then just getting it right at the point of need. And that point of need is a way that overcomes you learn all that stuff up front, you forget it all, and then you can't use the software anyway. So to streamline things, it's just always to feed you a little bit about what you need when you need it. But what's a little bit, Dr. Jill? I bet if we lined up a whole bunch of experts, we'd have a whole different thoughts on how long a micro learning is. Is it a half hour? Is it an hour? In comparison to a week-long course, a day course is micro? Like, what do you think?
On average, I would a lot of the research. If we're starting to see, there's a growing body of research starting to focus in on what are best practices for micro learning, and of course, like any good instructional design research, the findings are saying it all depends. But I would say on average, you're looking at segments that are ideally around that 5-minute mark, and I would say give or take 2. And so if you're looking at that, if when we're designing micro learnings, if we're teaching somebody how to complete a task and you really need that 6th minute or that 7th minute for them to be engaged, to be able to fully understand whatever the purpose of that module is, then it's okay. But you really want to try and stick around that 5-minute mark, because it's so condensed, and it's not supposed to be encompassing everything with all of the details. It's really just getting down to what are the absolutes. And so when you think about it, for those of you that are joining us today, if you've designed content, on one hand, we think of microlearning and say, this is easy to do because it's not going to take as long. It's not going to be as expensive if we were to develop e-learning modules from scratch. But at the same time, you really have to think about what are those most important fundamental pieces, because we can't stretch it out. If you're really thinking about, I need someone to learn how to do something around that 5-minute mark, that really forces us to make hard decisions sometimes about the amount of detail that we may or may not go into when designing these.
Mm-hmm.
But John, you also brought up too, when we think about micro learning, and I know we've said just in time learning too. Those are 2 terms where they are different things, but they often sometimes will get used synonymously. And so it's important when we're talking about micro learning today with everyone. There are times where micro learnings will be serving those just in time learning purposes. We've got somebody who's sitting at their desk, and they're using a new software perhaps for the first time, and they need to know how do they perform a particular task. That's when micro learning is serving that just in time purpose. There could be other times where your organization may be rolling out just refresher courses that perhaps had occurred or were sent out to your employees or your customers 6 months ago. And so it's just how much are people remembering? And so again, just kind of thinking about micro learning can serve multiple purposes. If you look on this slide, another question that we get asked a lot is, what does micro learning look like? And it can come in a variety of shapes and sizes and different methods, kind of just as we were seeing in that chat earlier about some of the different ways in which you all are using micro learning in your daily lives. And so if you look here, it could be those short video clips. It could be those short videos we're accessing. We saw YouTube was getting mentioned quite a bit in the chat earlier. It could be infographics. So if you think about a job aid outlining the steps in a process that you might have, sometimes those can be print-based. Sometimes it might be a file that you're downloading or accessing. It could be podcasts, things that we might be listening to, just reinforcing key concepts. Interactive simulations. So if anyone's ever worked on a new product, or you're on a website, you're not quite sure where to go next, you might click on a help button, and then some additional instruction will appear walking you through what those next steps are for you to be able to replicate that. And then, of course, the traditional e-learning modules that I think many of us are familiar with, they're just much more condensed, keeping in mind that you're aiming for that 5-minute mark.
Mm-hmm. And because they're short, there's a lot more that could probably go on this slide. I've seen things like quizzes, flashcard practice, games in general of different sorts that are testing knowledge, polls and surveys, chatbots with those interactive simulations, social interactions in general, commenting on something, questions of the day, are all little pieces of content that could join this slide. And I think with good microlearning programs, it's really good to shake it up, try to have a lot of different mediums and formats in there to keep the learners engaged over time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I also just saw in the chat, someone just posted using microlearnings even for policy updates, absolutely. Anytime you're trying to communicate those subtle changes, perhaps in your organization, or you're adopting a new process, microlearnings are great for that, to be able to get that information out, to make sure that everyone who needs to see it is able to see it and access it quickly.
Mm-hmm. Where do microlearnings go? If you're pushing something out, Jill, does it go to your mobile device? Does it go to your LMS? Does it go somewhere else?
I would say it can go to all of those things. I've seen where microlearnings have been included in weekly newsletters. I've seen them where they've been included in blogs. There may be opportunities where they're embedded in the LMS, and they could have direct pushes going out to employees or customers based on certain things that they might have selected that they were interested in continuing to follow up on. I've seen where administration can, if they want everyone to see something or they need everyone to complete certain trainings or refresher courses, then they have the ability to push those out through a learning management system that learners or employees can access at any time from a variety of different places.
Well, great. And now one last comment on the video clips. It can really be both ways. It can be the organization pushing the video clips out on learning, but just as easily, it could be from a community micro learning standpoint, having the actual learners themselves upload videos and share videos with them doing things. And so that makes it more interactive, even with the micro learning programs. All right.
And so when we're looking at, our focus for today was to talk about ways in which microlearning can help enhance the customer experience. And so some of the things that we think about when we're looking at ways in which we can really enhance our customer experience roadmap, things about agile skill building, real-time application, and reinforcing those important concepts. And so when you think about who your customers may be, it's looking at those opportunities where we can acquire and refine skills. If we're trying to teach them about product knowledge relatively quickly, micro learnings are fantastic when we're making subtle updates to software or products, and we want to make sure that our customers are aware of any changes or new features that may be available to them. This is a great opportunity where micro learning can be used just to remind them of some of those features, taking into account that they're already familiar with a particular product or system. Other benefits that we have here too is just the real-time application and really thinking about what are the ways that we can design these micro-learning experiences that they will benefit our learners when they need them. And so really trying to anticipate our customers' needs. What happens after perhaps they've purchased a product or a service and they're back either at home or they're at work and they're trying to use it. What types of things are they going to have questions about? What types of content might they get stuck on where it would be beneficial for them to have some additional support? That's where those micro learnings can really come in handy for reinforcing some of those important concepts, some of those important steps, emphasizing some of those steps that we know people may struggle with time and time again. This is where we can kind of see how we can anticipate what those customer needs are, look at data we have about our customers and our audiences, and then really look at how can microlearning be used to kind of help mitigate some of those challenges that they may experience once training's complete, or time has passed after a little ways and they're trying to do things on their own independently.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think the power here, and the instructional designer in me loves this part the most, is what this gives you the opportunity to do is to bring together your skills, bring together your learning objectives, bring together your assessment questions, and as well as your content. And all four of those things are all tied to one skill, one micro learning, one piece. And you'll be able to use all those separately to combine those different skills and those into different paths for different roles. And all that is the foundation to making your micro learning adaptive and personalized over time. And so by tying it to that smallest, you get over that hump that you're saying before, that's hard to design things smaller in some cases. But if you focus on the skill and on the learning objective, it becomes a lot easier because you get to put those blinders on. And that's really where all the power comes in, is having everything tied together like that allows learners to get what they need exactly when they need it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so when we look at some of the key advantages, certain ones that you might want to, if you were looking at how you might integrate microlearning, or perhaps you're already doing it and you're just kind of thinking about what are some of those key advantages to improving the customer experience, it's really taking into account that idea of flexibility and accessibility. So trying to think about ways in which we can disseminate that information and get that information out to our audiences as quickly as possible and in a way that's easily accessible. I'm going to say as well as easily digestible, so that they know where to go when they might have have help, or they might have a need, and really looking at what are some of those different methods. And so it might be looking at already, if you're looking at your customer experience roadmap, what are the current ways that you're disseminating information and getting that out to your audience? And so you may find that you're able to piggyback on that with your micro learnings, but you also may find that it might be helpful to have that central hub where people can go, and it might be categorized depending on what some of those different training needs may be. But again, thinking about this idea of flexibility and accessibility, and knowing that our customers are going to be accessing a lot of this information on their own time and on their own terms when they need it. It's really important that we're thinking about the ways in which we can really enhance this this customer support experience as well. And so this is where thinking about ways in which we can anticipate their needs. If we know, if you've got a customer service team and you're getting repeat calls or inquiries regarding how to troubleshoot something, that would be a great indicator of where micro learning might come in handy. And that way you can direct them to that micro learning. And so it's really working and looking at your customer support teams, looking at what data do they have? What are those questions that their customers are asking when they're being onboarded onto a new product? What are the questions that they tend to get asked maybe 3 months later after the customer is getting situated and finally kind of starting to settle into using the new product or using a new service? Thinking about those types of questions and looking at that types of data can be a great place to start for what are those repeat questions and how might we be able to address them through a micro learning. And then thinking about where's the best place to put all of this so that it's centrally located, it's easily accessible, and they know how to navigate wherever those resources are. But as we said earlier, it's also a great way to empower our customers. And that, again, we're giving the learner, we're giving the customer autonomy so that they're not relying on perhaps meeting with us at a particularly scheduled time. They're able to do a lot of this independently, perhaps before they might call a customer support phone number and speak to someone. So it gives them some options to try and be able to troubleshoot things and learn new things, learn new skills on their own.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the core things that you said that is really exciting is that it's tied to a business problem. And, when you were beginning in the presentation today is when to use microlearning, when not to use it, what's it good for, what's it's not. What it's always good for is when it's solving a business problem. And so in that example of customer support and the calls that are coming into customer support, or maybe an extra duration in the onboarding process that's unnecessary, all those things have business impact inside your organization. Customer satisfaction rates, renewal rates, the cost to field those calls and answer those calls are all tied to business. And so by starting there and working backwards into developing the content, like you said, that's solving these problems, it's also super measurable on what that learning is doing for the good of the business. And that can be translated into dollars and cents. And that, though it's not instructional design, it's sure a great way to get more budget next year.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so one of the things we have on this slide here is just thinking about what are some of those best practices. And we always have to be careful whenever we talk about best practices, because we know that anytime we're designing solutions, whether it's for our customers or if we're designing learning content, usually a good answer is everything is so situated that it all depends. But I think that regardless of the types of micro learning formats your organization may be using or you may be considering in the future, these points here fit across all those different types of formats that we discussed earlier. And so anytime you're designing microlearning, whether it's for a podcast, whether it's one of those short tutorial videos or a job aid or a very brief e-learning module to reinforce some previous training content, it's really important that we're designing it so that it reflects small, manageable units. And so one of the best ways we can go about doing that is limiting those microlearnings to one single learning objective. And not being sneaky where you're sneaking in multiple verbs into that one learning objective, but really thinking about, one verb per objective and really focusing on just what's that one verb, what's that one task we want our learners to be able to complete. And in doing so, that also helps us start to look at what's that content that we have that's, a need to know versus a like to know. That kind of helps us kind of sift out some of that information. Again, when we're thinking about these small manageable units, when we're limiting our micro learnings to reflect, that one learning objective, it helps us in that if we find that we've got extra content, or we see that there's extra, verbs or extra learning objectives sneaking in, then that might be a good indicator that you might need a larger learning module, or you might need a training session or a webinar. But if we're thinking about those micro learnings in terms of how can we break up some of that larger content and focus in on these isolated tasks or these isolated skills, that's really helpful, regardless of the format that we may be choosing. And again, also thinking about the ways in which, how are our customers, how are our learners going to be experiencing these micro learnings? How are they going to go about navigating them? So there are times where all micro learning should be standalone learning experiences, but they can also be coupled together. So if you have certain products where you might have a series of micro learnings that you're developing, this is where you might have a collection of micro learnings to support that new product launch or new software rollout. So you can have them where you have a collection put together, but they can also be accessed individually. If you are planning on doing that or having multiple ones, having an intuitive navigation is really important, especially when, again, when we don't know when our customers might be accessing that information. They're going to be doing it on their own time in different time zones sometimes. And so it's really important that they're able to access that module. They know where to go. They don't need to have somebody, standing over their shoulder and telling them where to click or telling them where to go next or how to apply that information. It's even more important, especially when we think about learner autonomy and independent learning and just-in-time learning, that they're able to do that quickly. And that it's almost like it's self-explanatory. It becomes intuitive in nature for them to be able to navigate and know where to click. From a customer experience standpoint as well, it also helps with branding, right? You want to make sure that you have a consistent brand with those training materials or those micro learnings that you're offering your customers. You want them to be able to see it and recognize it, and also know that that resonates with your organization's brand and products and services that you're offering. John, do you have any other best practices that you might recommend?
Yeah, you got to keep it fun and keep it interactive. So use a lot of different varieties and a lot of different types so that you can make it engaging. And some of the best micro-learning programs that I see tie gamification elements through it. So keeping things like earning points and awards and badges and levels and leaderboards and streaks and different things like that, to when it is more programmatic and not just a one-off, to encourage that over time and that engagement. That'd be what I would add to this.
And that brings them back too, as well. I think about, I saw Duolingo got mentioned before too. I have lots of friends and colleagues that were trying to learn a new language, and they know that they're on that streak or they're on that roll. They want to see their names on that leaderboard. They want to get those messages to see how many points are they accruing, throughout the week or throughout the month, when they're talking with others too that might be doing the same challenge.
And you can even earn in Duolingo, earn special things that'll allow you to preserve your streak if you're going on vacation and things like that. That's how important those streaks are, that people don't want to give them up over time, including myself. All right.
Another thing to think about too, when we look at different L&D trends, there's a lot of trends going on right now in terms of personalized learning, adaptive learning. I heard John mention that earlier today as well. And so there's different ways in which we can personalize micro learnings to support customer experience, whether it be through tailored learning paths. So again, thinking about what might be a compilation of different micro learnings that we can put together as a collection that our customers can access. Those can be categorized according to roles within an organization or skill level. So I'm thinking, if we think about how you might roll out different software, there might be different administrative roles or learner roles, depending on what it may be. And so again, personalized learning can come in handy in that we can kind of put them into a variety of categories and collections so that they're easily accessible. Someone can find them quickly, knowing what their role may be or what their interactions are going to be with that particular software or that particular product. And again, with micro learnings, we have the ability to personalize these experiences. We can localize that content. And so if you're an organization and you might have customers in a variety of different geographical regions, we can tailor some of that content based on what some of those unique needs may be as well, so that we're meeting, different countries' expectations, as well as just a variety of different customer demographics. And then lastly, we have on here too, personalizing these things. It provides that opportunity to address those common customer challenges, or maybe those common customer complaints. What are the things that we're hearing where customers are saying, I need help, I don't know what the next step is, I don't know where to go from here. This provides us with that opportunity to really personalize that and make sure that we're pinpointing our instruction, that we're designing those micro learning experiences to support those needs, and that we're meeting that intended purpose.
Exactly. And it's hard to believe we got all the way in this presentation, 30 minutes in or so, without saying the words AI. AI, but that's what we're seeing now from a trend in learning systems standpoints, is really using artificial intelligence to make the learning more micro learning, or any type of learning, but micro learning in this case, more personalized and more adaptive. And so it's not just using things from their learner profile, which it is, like job role or organization or language or location of where their work could all be used to personalize, but it's also things that they're doing in and out of the system. So if it's like a software system, it could be monitoring, what features and functions you're using, and then using that to suggest the next learning nugget. It could also use things that you're doing outside of the system, and that's being tracked in the CRM. So tons of custom stuff, like going to a trade show or downloading this brochure or doing this, are all things that would cause a trigger to show you learning or not show you learning, or alter your path in one way or another. And so the old days of just having like one or two triggers to make the micro learning adaptive are really gone. Now the technology is there to make it super adaptive. So if you have 30,000 people going through the same course, theoretically, you can have 30,000 different versions of that micro learning program based on those roles over time. And that's just something that wasn't possible even a couple of years ago.
Yeah, no, you said AI first, so but I'm going to jump on that too. I think it's a really exciting time to see, when we're starting to see how AI is going to just change up and help make L&D more efficient. We're going to see the same thing with micro learnings. I think we're just touching the surface right now. But even looking at training materials, policies that your organization may have, how can AI be used to help sift through all of that information and break down some of that information into these, these manageable units for micro learnings. You might already have a training module that has 3 or 4 learning objectives that your employees or your customers were expected to go through. We're starting to see where AI can make it more efficient to go through and then just divide up that content into those individual micro learnings. And so it is really exciting. And as John has mentioned too, just being able to, to follow those trends in performance with not just our employees, but also our customers, to see where are they clicking, where are they, what information are they accessing, and to be able to anticipate those needs and prompt and say, have you considered this, or these additional micro learnings or these additional resources may be beneficial to you as you're working on this task. But just having those pop up so that the learner doesn't have to determine that they might need them and then go and search for them on their own. Just having some of those things being suggested to them is also really helpful. So I'm very excited to kind of see just where AI is going to come in for, upskilling, remediation, helping people that may be struggling with certain concepts, some of those refreshers. But it's a really exciting time, especially to see how this might be, again, just further enhancing that customer experience.
And even this session, which ironically is awful macro for a lesson on micro learning, but you could put this video recording into a lot of different tools right now, and it'll just automatically slice this hour up into 20 different segments, all based on the different things that we're talking about, the different, the categories, and not only do that, but then overlay it with the cool stuff from, TikTok with, words coming up and, the text overlays and things like that. And it's automatic. You don't even have to do anything. And so, this one session, could be 10 or 20 different sessions that we use strategically over time. And that's just all at our fingertips now for almost nothing a month, to be able to do that.
And so John kind of started talking about this too earlier, but what are the ways in which we can engage our audience with microlearning? One of the benefits of microlearning that often gets mentioned is that it provides learner autonomy. There's a lot of opportunities for learners to be independent learners and to be learning on their own, just in time when they need it. But even if they're doing that, there's still lots of ways that we can create learning that is engaging, learning that's fun. As John mentioned earlier, there's those opportunities to be able to incorporate those interactive elements. It may be those quizzes, the videos. If it's a new software package or a new product feature, perhaps it's running them through a simulation where they're actually having to physically click and see where to go next, especially if there's some steps that have changed in that process. And so those are ways that the learners are still actively engaged with their learning, and they're not just sitting there and just listening to everything. They have that opportunity to be able to play around with the software or different features, to be able to explore that, take a more active role in that learning experience. But we also, I'm going to kind of jump down a little bit. We talked about gamification, and this is where those leaderboards are really important. Digital badges. So depending on the various types of customer support resources you may have available for your customer audience, perhaps it's providing them with badges. Perhaps it's certificates of completion as they're going through a variety of product updates or participating in a variety of different micro learnings. This is a great way for learners to be able to see over an extended period of time how many different training materials or experiences have they participated in, whether it's over 6 months or over a year. Especially too, one of the challenges that we have, whether it was for employee development or if it was for customer training, time is a really valuable factor, right? We only have so much time in our day. And so anytime we're looking at ways in which we're going to have to dedicate time to training, micro learnings can be really handy in that it's just a few minutes for that particular experience versus any times if we're thinking about if we have to schedule something and go off site for several hours or for a couple of days. Micro learnings make it much more easy for learners to be able to carve out some time to be able to learn those new tasks. And so with digital badges, being able to show to what extent are they participating or engaging in the content, that can be really helpful as well. And it's also a way to kind of engage your teams. You might have customer teams, you might have a variety of employees that are going to go through trainings and updates together. So to have that competitive edge and make it more playful for them is also a way to kind of build some camaraderie among your customers and your learners as well.
Yeah, for sure. And the last little piece of that I think everybody always forgets, listeners and Dr. Jill, is points are great, streaks are great, but getting something is really fun. And something physical or something, a gift card or, a free month of access to the system or something that actually rewards you for doing that. Putting that carrot at the end of the line or at different parts along the line will really help engage your audience also, in addition to all the things that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh, and just another one too, that if we can just go back to that slide for 1 second, I was going to say just another thing too we have on here is really thinking about the scenario-based learning. So again, anytime if we can pull from some of our existing customer stories, perhaps it's those exemplary customer cases that we may have. It's looking at what were some of their challenges, being able to provide examples so that our customers and our learning audience can see how is somebody else using this? How are they able to apply this new method or this new change? Those are also ways in which we can engage our learners so that it's not just a lot of information being pushed out to them, but it's also helping them contextualize it. And then they can kind of be able to make those judgments in terms of how similar or dissimilar is that from their environment or their experiences.
Mm-hmm. And that's where the AI chatbots then come back into this equation then. in that they can use those customer experiences to build scenarios or decision trees that are micro learning events. But they can also help you practice different skills and different activities inside your micro learning paths as a way to reinforce it also. And I know that you folks are releasing this, see it in the chat here, a new digital assistant that's going to do a lot of those exact things. So that's pretty cool stuff coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're really excited. And so just with everything, when we talk about all of the benefits to micro learning, there are some things that we want to make sure that we're trying to avoid, or some challenges that we want to try and mitigate when we're considering using micro learning to improve customer experience. Again, we want to avoid packing too much information into a module, because if we have too much in that micro learning, that can cause cognitive overload. Oftentimes, learners can feel overwhelmed. They may not be paying attention. They might not know what they need to be paying attention to. And oftentimes they leave feeling frustrated. And so again, going back to that rule of, trying to limit it to one learning objective, one verb per objective, is another helpful hint for all of that. It's really important that we're also careful, though, as much as we're talking about the importance of being able to break content down. If you have certain content where you cannot, if you're generalizing it too much, or you think that you're oversimplifying certain tasks, or you're oversimplifying certain processes or policies, then that might be a good indicator of when micro learning might not be the most appropriate. And so it's really important that you're looking at that as well. You don't want to take, if there's a particular process or policy that's being implemented within your organization, and if people fail to adhere to it, it could cause, significant legal implications. We don't want to, tone it down so much that it seems like it's nothing because we were too busy trying to condense it into that 3-minute or that 5-minute micro learning module. And so it's really important that you're looking at when we're giving them what they absolutely need to know. If you find that you're really struggling and there's too much content that they really need to know, that's a good indicator that you need to expand on that training, and micro learning might not be the most appropriate. And so again, this varies sometimes when we're looking at the subject matter. This is where it might make sense to kind of divide content up and have a collection of micro learnings. And there might be times where you'll say, you know what, they really do need that longer training experience to make sure that from a liability standpoint, they have what they need. And so again, that's what's also really important. It's just, we don't, as much as we need to simplify, we don't want to oversimplify or overgeneralize for certain topics that might not be appropriate.
And I think you really have to think about the whole part about access of this, of these micro lessons, of thinking through your use case and getting that learner to the content in the most seamless way possible. And that doesn't include like logging in somewhere else to access it, or do that. So it's either feeding it to them in Teams or in Slack, or giving it to them on their mobile device or inside the software application that they're working on. But how could you deliver it at that point of need and make it so that it's seamless, that single sign-on works, or that you just access it, but still are able to track it? And that's the key. You all want to make it so seamless that, they can just take it and you don't know about it. You got to be able to understand what's being consumed and what's not as a way to judge your success. So I think that's something that's overlooked, that needs to be concentrated on a lot, just to make the whole process smoother for the learner, especially with such a short time. If you're going to do 2 minutes, you can't spend 10 seconds logging in.
And so as you're looking at ways in which you might choose to integrate micro learning into your CX roadmap, it's really important that you're just revisiting what are those objectives within that CX roadmap. What are all the various methods and formats and platforms you're using to communicate and reach your audience? And then it's looking at what are the ways in which micro learning might be able to help enhance that. And so if you look at what are your communication strategies that are already working well, are there particular ways that you can, pump out a micro learning experience to them, or you can share that micro learning experience with them using those existing formats? If you're looking at different ways you might be able to expand on things or expand on different product offerings or enhancing that customer support, it's important that you're setting clear objectives for what is the purpose that training is going to serve within your customer experience roadmap, and then where does microlearning fit in within that that training umbrella. Again, it's really important that we're considering when we're thinking about our customer experience roadmap is making information accessible and intuitive. And while, just making sure that our customers know where do they go if they need help, where do they go if they need additional assistance, we want to make sure that they're able to figure out where do they go when they want to access those micro learnings. If we could design the best set of micro learnings and tutorials walking them through things, but if they can't find them and they don't know how to click on them or how to access them, those tutorials are dead on arrival. And so we really want to make sure that they know where they're able to go, when they're able to go, and that they can use them intuitively. And then again, really thinking about the ways in which we can have consistency with our design. And so making sure that we're focusing in on what's our branding look like, what's that messaging look like typically when we're engaging with our customer audience. And again, making sure that we're factoring in that important message design when we're having these conversations about where does training fit into the CX roadmap as well as micro learning.
Mm-hmm. Developing micro learning takes some budget, takes some time, takes some effort. For an organization. So to start integrating it in, you have to justify that time and that effort of creating that. And so the easiest way to do that is, you hit on it earlier, is start at solving a problem that exists and get some small wins under your belt as you expand the program and achieve more budget over top of that. And the easiest place to go, and you already said it, is go to your customer success organization and just do an inventory of the calls that you got in the last week. What are people calling about? What buckets are they in? And classify those and pick one of them and solve it. And now you have your measurable win. And that measurable win will pay for the budget. It pays for the business case inside, and it allows you to go through that practical process in the out years or the out quarters of getting more budget to make a bigger impact in your organization. And this is a way that training organizations get that seat at the proverbial executive table, is that everything is tied to a business result. And so customer support, that's the low hanging fruit to go in and solve some problems.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so in the chat, for anybody that's been creating micro learning at your organization or in your personal life, go ahead, tell us some challenges that you've been running into. And it's also a good time for questions and things like that. So and strategy or anything that we talked about, or love to hear what successes you're having. If anybody's tied it to actual measurable business results like I've been talking about, chat away. Ask us questions. All right. As the chat's come in, I'll hop over to the Q&A. Do you have examples of using microlearning to help improve skills like communication, conflict resolution, and empathy? As a matter of fact, I know this great organization that is doing that through the concept of simulations, of AI simulations to practice these different skills. So practice showing empathy, and then the AI bot basically can grade you according to a rubric that the instructor defines in terms of words to include or strategies to take and things like that. So we're seeing a lot of that simulation or that scenario based stuff being driven in really small pieces to keep on trying different scenarios, different sales scenarios, or in this case, different communication scenarios or leadership or so forth. So that's one thing. How about you, Jill? Have you seen any examples of that?
Nothing. I've seen where, when we're thinking about how we demonstrate empathy, how we engage in conflict resolution, a lot of those were, if you were to go through a lengthier training, there's several steps, right, that they typically will walk you through, whether it's 10 steps to conflict resolution or 7 steps. And so this is where micro learnings can be helpful to be able to just emphasize either those steps very quickly and give a quick example of that, whether it may be focusing in on each of those steps individually. And as John's mentioned, interacting with an AI chatbot to practice those skills. It's a great way where microlearning can help to reinforce some of those new steps and procedures that, especially when we're looking at things that may require some behavioral change, that takes time too. And so those are great opportunities for learners to be able to, kind of think about that information and then practice it ongoingly to get more comfortable with it.
Great. We got another question about the technology piece. That's the part I love. On how to make all this happen. Do you integrate your microlearning platform to your LMS? Is your LMS your microlearning platform? Yes, it could be both. So there's dedicated microlearning authoring tools out there that'll allow you to create programs programmatically of all the different pieces, and then you just deploy that inside your LMS almost as a learning object. So that's one strategy organizations take, and that eliminates the back end that you're talking about. So just deliver those. In other cases, the LMS can manage and take care of that activity, and that's becoming more and more common in the industry of being able to support both formal and micro learning simultaneously in the same platform. So those are probably the two main strategies I see from a technology standpoint right now.
And I think too, oftentimes it comes down to what do you want to use them for? Is it looking for refreshers? Are these mandatory trainings, mandatory refreshments we want our learners to go through? That can look differently too with how it might be integrated into the LMS. We also know there's a lot of LMSs where you can incorporate a lot of different assets. And so it might be uploading or sharing a podcast or sharing a video from an organizational leader, walking people through perhaps a new change that may be occurring within that organization or how to complete a new process or task. And so, again, I think it's looking at the ways in which you're anticipating or intending for your audience to be able to interact with that information as well.
We got another from Deborah here. Says, in a corporate environment, who controls microlearning for the corporation's products? Is that instructional designers, technical writers, web content specialists? Yes, I think it's all of those in different organizations. So it can be driven by the traditional learning and development teams that are taking care of employee learning and all of that. But often in software companies, organizations, that if L&D isn't driving it, it's still going to get done. And so it's from the customer experience or customer support or a partner, channel partners are those teams then bring in instructional designers and technical writers and work. And in holistic organizations, really, whether you're training customers, you're training partners, or you're training your employees, if the content is generally the same, holistically, it's best to think about it the same and see how you can develop once and use in three different ways.
Yeah, I definitely think it takes a team approach. I mean, and if we're just thinking about it in terms of that customer experience, it's having your customer support teams working with product development to be able to inform what are those new changes. You want to make sure your customer support team is familiar with what those changes will be so that they can be successful in helping your customers. But also, bringing in your marketing units as well to make sure, do we have consistent branding? What does this look like with other messaging that our organization is doing? And of course, I'm always going to be preferential to the instructional designers, but having that instructional designer coming in to make sure that, is this good learning? Have we designed it appropriately where it's going to support our learners? I think if any organization were to take a siloed approach, I think there's a very good chance there would be stuff that would be missing. And so making sure that you are employing that team approach to designing micro learnings, especially with that customer experience, I think is really beneficial.
Awesome. Stacy Jordan's getting some just-in-time help here because their team is looking to launch a new micro learning program. Dr. Jill, what do you recommend would they start? What would be their first step?
If it were me, I think I would want to try and get some of that low-hanging fruit first. And so I would start looking at what are some of the common challenges that your team's facing. So if it's with customers, it's looking at what are those common customer inquiries that are coming in. What are your sales staff getting hit with the most when they're talking to their customers? Those are great indicators for what training you might want to, or what micro learnings you might want to start with first. If you're looking at it within your organization and training your employees, what are those common challenges that employees are facing? And then also looking at not just with challenges, but what are some of those infrequent tasks? If I'm doing something, multiple times a day on my computer, it's very easy for me to be able to go through those tasks. I'm probably not even thinking about what I'm doing because it's just become so ingrained in me. It's intuitive. But if there's those tasks that I might have to do, maybe it's like once a month, or perhaps it's every, a couple times a year. That's where micro learnings can also be really beneficial, or those job aids, just that quick refresher on click here, click there. Where do I need to go? That can be very helpful as well. So I would kind of do that combination in terms of, what are those common challenges that you're facing? And that would also show people the utility of your micro learning. So hopefully you can get more buy-in with it. And then you can continue to expand.
Yep. That's great. We have a question here. What's the process of taking long product videos? We'll send that out afterwards, but there's tools that are there that AI will do that all for you. So don't go splitting up your own videos right now using Camtasia. There's other ways to get that to the 80-90% with no effort. And so we'll send those along afterwards. What are some micro development, micro learning, dedicated authoring tools? Learning is one, MyQuest is one, Code of Talent is a third, are all authoring tool, micro learning authoring tools that augment LMSs. So you snap them into an LMS and use them together, some ones that are out there. What about, we're running out of time here, but Doctor, one more here. What about some best practices for scaling a micro learning program across multiple regions and markets? You have any thoughts on that? Maybe different languages. Say.
Yeah, I would think about looking at it. If you're looking at doing something like that and you're looking at that customer experience roadmap, it's looking at what are those common needs across all of those different regions. So then you might have certain modules where you're not going to need a lot of variability with them. You might have other modules where then you can start to really customize those, or there might be certain examples that you might customize depending on the geographical region and those customer demographics. But I think it's important to kind of look at that across your roadmap and go, what is it that regardless of what country or what geographical location they're in, they're experiencing these things. These are their common needs. And then from there, you can kind of start scaling that up in terms of if there's certain countries or certain regions that, you're going to need to have a completely different curriculum, then you can go from there. But just to kind of start early with that low hanging fruit, I would start with the ones where you're going to be able to reach the largest audience first. And then you can kind of go from there with how you might customize for some of those different regions as well.
Good answer. How do you recommend demonstrating the impact of micro learning to higher ups who might be pushing for more traditional training methods? Well, I think this goes back to what we've been talking about the whole time. If you're fixing a real problem, you can tie to the business. And really, whether you're fixing it with a course or you're fixing it with micro learning, that depends on the situation. The key thing is that you're fixing it and you're solving a business problem. And that is always 100% of the time the best way to catch the attention of higher ups, because they're not worried about logins. They're not worried about course drop-offs rates. They're not worried about launches. What they're worried about is business impact of making money, saving money, improving business processes. So if you tie your micro learning to that, you'll always catch the higher ups' attention.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Especially when we look at with micro learnings, that time on task, when we can minimize the amount of time people are struggling with completing a task, and micro learning can help within a relatively few short minutes. That's also really helpful as well. And that's where your administration their ears should perk up and they should be paying attention.
Mm-hmm. And what's the average time spent developing a 5-minute micro learning? I don't think it really changes, huh? It's the same time of if you're going to develop an hour. You probably have the same activities of instructional design, graphics, thought processes, learning objective writing, assessments, and so forth. So if you do down to 5-minute section, you're going to take that same portion. I would just scale it down by that same amount. I think it scales up and down. But if you're using AI, that'll certainly make it easier. We're out of time.
Great way to wrap up. Thank you both so much for your time. Thanks to everybody who joined us from all around the world to be a part of this conversation. We really appreciate everybody's insightful comments and thought-provoking questions. Just a reminder that this webinar was recorded, so you should be getting a link to that recording in the email address that you signed up through. So keep an eye on your inbox. Thanks, everybody, again, and thank you, Dr. Jill. Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a great day,
everyone.
everyone. Thanks for tuning in
Yeah.
and being so participating so much. That's great to see the chat and the Q&As going the whole time. That was really helpful to make this more engaging for everyone. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.